You and your brother look alike.
Very much. That's my mom.
Oh.
That's my grandma. Her mom.
Well, hello, Kurush. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. Um, I've known you for 3 years and taken, coming up to four now.
Four.
Yeah, and taken several of your classes. And over the last 4 years, have had the honor of calling you friend. So to be here in person, um, I'm so excited. So thank you first and foremost.
So it's great to be here and it's an honor. And yes, I'm incredibly happy to think of you as one of my friends from whom I learned so much.
So yesterday, you made an incredible dinner, and for that I was honored. And during the course of that, I got kind of emotional. So as you know, my mom passed away 5 years ago, and I kind of went on this journey of really finding parts of me that I felt like I lost in that. And one of the dishes was placed on the table, and you said, and you smiled big, and you said, "My mom would be proud. It's as if she made this." Can you talk to me a little bit about that in the context of what that means to you, not only as her son, but also in the context of how food is shown as love?
Okay, so this is a very personal and a very difficult answer because a lot of this is very intangible and very difficult to quantify. But almost universally, a mother's love language is food. She might be angry with you, she might be upset with you, she might want to tan your backside, but when you're down, when you're low, she'll be there and there'll be something on the plate. Even if she's not very physically, emotional, you know, she will be there through her food. And at least that is the way it was to me. So, my mother and I had a very close relationship, which led to a lot of shouting and screaming. But we mutually bonded over food in many different ways. And she was a brilliant cook, and absolutely shameless to say, came from a line of brilliant cooks. Her mother was perhaps an even more brilliant cook than her, and more understated, more frugal. Uh, so many things that I eat and I cook and I feed people today are things that my mother fed me, cooked for me, and it's in so many ways her legacy of love. And therefore, there is nothing better than that to pass that love on with. We'd been ready for mum passing away for many years. Not to say that it was any easier, but we'd known that this was coming because she had very ill health. Uh, what upset me perhaps more was my dad passing away because that was not something that any of us expected. He was kind of healthier than all of us put together. And he was here and then he was gone, just like that. And that, in some ways, has taken much more time to get over than mum passing away.
Thank you. That I think in the context of love, like I can relate. I always say my mom made the best scrambled eggs in the world. And when we think about that in terms of Indian food, I always think back to Indira, giving me that first bit of dal that just felt like a hug. What are some of the dishes that connect with you on that level of feeling like it touches your soul?
Uh, so my mother made the best fried eggs after her mother. Um, and I really miss those. So that's one thing. Uh, there was a lot of experimentation in the food in my house. So the fact that my mother cooked very good Parsi food was not enough. She cooked a lot of what we in the 70s and 80s called continental food. So there were a lot of bakes and things like that. But comfort food at the end of the day was what we call dhandar ne tareli machi, which is basically dhan or dhan is rice. So it would be plain steamed rice. There would be dal, which would usually be pigeon pea or masoor dal, lentils, uh, split lentils, cooked with just salt and turmeric in water. But it's a thicker dal than most people eat in India. Uh, Rice with dal on top, a little bit of ghee, and on the side, a fried fish. Pomfret, if it was available and we could afford it, maybe some surmai, maybe some rawas, maybe some bhangra mackerel. Again, depending on what was available, what was seasonal, simply coated in salt, turmeric, and chili powder, shallow fried on a hot griddle. And this to me has always been comfort food. The only thing that you could exchange in this meal would be exchanging prawns in place of fish. They would be fried the same way, they would have the same spices. And this is something that I can eat every day. It often drives my wife nuts because she can't understand how I could eat this every day. But to me, this is something that she makes, which is identical to which my mother made, very unintentionally. And therefore, it is to me, in so many ways, one of the things that sings to my heart.
She was a legend in
Oh,
the
yes.
community, cookbook author, and somebody who really did just remarkable things in the culinary world. And she also taught you how to season food, which is an incredible story. And I'd love for you to share that.
So she could cook in her head, which meant that she could see, smell, taste something and break it down. And I've never been even half as good as her. And she was a legend in her time and continues to be one today. Her first book, Chamvachalogy, is still, whenever available, the part of young Parsi wife, girls' trousseaux. And I remember so many mothers who told me, I sent my girl off to America with a copy of your mother's book so she wouldn't shame me and stuff like that. So, yeah, and that's become a huge part of her legacy. Uh, when I was about 10 or 11, we were catering at a place called Alblis Bagh, and my mother would go home in the afternoon for about an hour or so to nap and then dress up and come for the evening for the functions we were catering to. And she was passing through the kitchen and she turned around and kind of went, not enough salt in that. And my chief cook at that time immediately walked up to this large vessel with about 150 liters of dal cooking in it and went, oh, yeah, right. And I was like, you guys got to be kidding me, right? I mean, you can't smell if there's enough salt or less salt or whatever. And the whole kitchen kind of turned around and looked at me and said, what? You can't smell the salt? And I said, don't be stupid, there's nothing like that. So for the next 6 months, they kept catching me unawares and sticking a teaspoon in front of my face and saying, smell, taste, smell, taste. And it would be undersalted, oversalted, perfectly salted at different times. And it didn't make any sense to me. And I thought they were just kind of, this was some kind of joke that they were playing. And then one day, about 6 months down the line, I had an epiphany. I suddenly realized what it was they were saying, and that I could smell the salt being right. So it was not smelling less salt or more salt. The dish smelled correct when there was the right amount of seasoning. If it was not, it smelled raw. I mean, I can't use any other word for it, but it smelled raw, unfinished. And if it was over salted, it smelled metallic. You could basically smell that extra sodium that wasn't, didn't have any place over there. It might not sound very scientific today, but that's how I understood it. And over the years, I have surprised a lot of my cooks by passing by and saying, not enough salt. And they'll be like, what? And stick a teaspoon into it. Yeah, not no salt. He's right.
It's amazing. What are some ways that you found later on to do your mom kind of an honor and service now that she's not here?
My story started earlier. So she was an archaeologist before she was a caterer.
Hmm.
I went on to do archaeology. And then at some point, I realized that archaeology was not going to pay the bills. So I came back home and I told my mother I wanted to take over the catering business. We restarted the business in my name with her very firmly in the saddle. And I learned the ropes from her and then took over from her. And finished my PhD. Much to everybody's surprise, I later got a job teaching archaeology, but that was many years down the line. So, by keeping alive the catering legacy that she had, that was the first big step. The other was continuing to teach archaeology, and in that way, honoring her in both the fields that she loved so much. The third way, which is a little difficult to quantify maybe, was making sure that the family, who she valued above everything else, stayed together in some way or the other, not necessarily physically, but kept in touch in times of happiness, in times of sadness, and stayed a family just like she'd have wanted us to.
When I kind of started this journey, many years ago, I always heard the phrase, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And over the course of the last, decade plus, I've had a few handful of teachers, but I flew 7,000 miles across two continents and literally on the other side of the world to do this interview with you. Because I think that out of everyone I've met, you are one of the most respected and one of the most knowledgeable, and I'm going to say it, food historians. Your trade as a doctor, clearly, archaeology, but your deep understanding and love for food from the subcontinent and really beyond is vast. And so I really want to ask you this one question that seems so simplistic, but I'm sure has a great answer. And that's this: what is Indian food?
There's two answers, the short answer and the long answer. Food that Indians have eaten or do eat is Indian food. The long answer is that Indian food is essentially, like most of the foods of larger geopolitical zones, a food based essentially on a carbohydrate source. In India, there are multiple options in this with some degree of overlap. Rice is ubiquitous, though not necessarily the only carbohydrate source. Wheat is equally popular, though not as much everywhere. But it's essentially wheat and rice today, which make up a binding story amongst the various carbohydrates of India. Uh, India is a low meat eating country. This doesn't mean that Indians are vegetarians, which is a fallacy that is, kind of promoted through ignorance. Uh, Indians, about 77% of Indians are non vegetarians. That includes everything from people who eat eggs to people who eat beef and pork and everything in between. Uh, Indians are essentially lacto vegetarians. So, if there's one thing that really binds us together, is essentially, apart from the extreme northeast, a huge love for milk and milk products, especially milk fat in the form of butter and ghee, that's clarified butter, and a large usage of curd, which is not the same as yogurt, but would be close in English. So, lacto vegetarianism, rice and wheat form one pair of things that make Indian food Indian. What really makes Indian food Indian to a large extent is the enormous quantum of what we call dal and kadhanya. So this is basically polished and unpolished, split, unsplit, whole, fresh, dried, etc., pulses of different kinds. These include the dals, these include the chanas, these include the peas, these include the beans, and so many other uh, peripheral agents as such. Uh, we have been very open to embracing all kinds of pulses. The phaseolus that comes to us from Mexico, the butter beans that come to us. We've always had vetch and horse gram and moong. We've also had lentils for a long time. We've had in large parts of India pigeon peas and so many other different complex carbohydrates. So, Indian food is essentially food which hovers around a base carbohydrate, which is usually then stacked against some kind of complex carbohydrate in the form of a dal, be it a very dry or a very, very thin gravy, and which may or may not then have additional vegetables depending on when and where, and which may or may not have meat, dairy, poultry in various forms also as part of the meal. So it sounds far more messy than it actually is. But if you spend enough time moving across India, you will see the kind of similarities that there are. And India has had an enormous amount of scope for inclusivity. So there has been a huge amount of millet that was partaken at one time, which is much less today. There was a much higher amount of meat eaten during certain phases in certain areas. The coasts consume an enormous amount of fish, though that is very surprisingly not the case in Gujarat today for, well, religious reasons. But there is enough evidence that tells us otherwise in the past. You have a lot of riverine fish consumption from the Himalayas to the Bay of Bengal, the entire Mahanadi Delta, the Ganga, the Yamuna, the Sindh and its tributaries. So it's essentially opportunistic meat eating with very, very sensible use of milk protein to fill up the gaps and complex carbohydrates that we call dals and pulses to help make up the shortfall. It doesn't always make it up, and India and Indian food, by and large, if it's not very upper caste food, can be less nutrient dense than food in many parts of the world, but is not necessarily deficient in any way. Adding to this is the great Indian love for spices. So Indians absolutely love their spices, and many of these spices are autochthonous to the Indian mainland. Surprisingly, a number of them, like chilies, are not, but we had alternatives for the same, and we have very easily taken to replacements. So, for example, the kind of cinnamon that we see in the West is not so common to India. We have our local cinnamon, which is cassia bark. We have a different kind of bay leaf, which is our bay leaf, if you'd like to call it that. We don't call it a bay leaf. We call it a tamal patta. We've always had black cardamom. We were very happy to take to green cardamom. And when, from very early times, we had traders bringing in cloves and nutmeg, and then nutmeg and mace, thanks to the Portuguese, grew on the west coast of India. So various different spices have been used. Some are not as popular as they were. Some are more popular today. So there are cycles, and a decent amount of heat is something that is also the hallmark of Indian food. It's not necessarily, the kind of food that will leave your mouth in flames, but it can be. So this penchant for spices, this heavy leaning on dals, uh, rice and wheat, as I said, being our main starches, and for oil, two very distinct oils make up India: mustard oil and sesame oil. Subsequent to the Portuguese arrival, we also have groundnut oil playing an interesting role, and in the modern era, sunflower oil. But the traditional oils of India, for northern India, has always been mustard oil. For southern and central India, has always been sesame oil. So these again are binding factors. So it is a complex set of cuisines, the superset of which is Indian food. And that is actually a short answer.
I I I keep thinking of how Indian food changes every 30 kilometers and even less, right? You know,
Yes, no, maybe. It depends
sure.
on where you are. It depends on ingredients. So, you can define the different tastes of India by looking at uh, what fat, what souring agent is used from zone to zone. So, what is the choice of fat? What is the choice of souring agent? And if you look at this, you will actually see this kind of continuity in a very interesting way. In certain areas, the souring agents will change very radically. In certain areas, the souring agents have been stagnant for thousands of years. So, it's that kind of thing. And over very large distances, because there is only a single souring agent. But Indian food is very often balanced. And in trying to achieve this balance, it is done with hyperlocal ingredients. So, what we are talking about in the West about eating local is something that by default Indians have done. They haven't gone out looking to eat local. They've eaten local because it's the only way they know how to eat. And it's only in the last 100 or 200 years that urbanism has led to the kind of availability of products, and India is becoming a village.
So I want to talk about the two A's. And the two A's are the word authentic and appropriation. A lot of times somebody will say, well, that's not authentic dal, or that's not authentic, this dish or that dish. What makes something authentic?
So there are levels of authenticity. Authentic by itself is a very, very bad word and is, according to me, a term of food abuse. Um, every single generation changes almost every single dish. Mother to daughter, mother in law to daughter in law, and then as a woman has her own kitchen and her own daughters and her own daughters in law. There is an entire evolution to food taking place, newer ingredients being available, changes of location, changes of country. So, authenticity is not really something that is graven in stone. Uh, this might not be authentically like your mother made it. But what does that mean? Uh, is there an authentic uh, recipe for this that you can take back 500 years and say this is the 500-year recipe and we do it exactly like this? Then you start talking about authenticity and it makes sense. When you talk about authenticity in the larger scope of a cuisine and you're true to the certain idioms of that cuisine. So, for example, if you used mustard oil to make French food, that would definitely not be authentic.
Right.
But if you said you were experimenting with mustard oil and French cuisine, why would it be any less authentic? So, there is six of one, half a dozen of the other, and the word authentic really doesn't hold any water. Unless it is authentically something you ate in a restaurant and another restaurant says it's the same dish made the way the first restaurant makes it, and you say, no, this is not authentic. This is wrong. I've eaten there many times and I've eaten at your place, and you make a fabulous, butter chicken, for lack of anything else. But I'm sorry, your butter chicken is not the same as that butter chicken. And that's it. So, in that set of parameters, authentic makes sense. But when you talk about, oh, my grandmother used to make it this way and therefore it's authentic, that's rubbish. That's just authentic to the lineage from your grandmother to your mother to you. And that's about it. And very often food, which is one of the strongest mnemonics of all, uh, can play tricks on you. You can taste things in your head that are far, far more delicious than they ever were because they're a memory and they're associated with so much else. So authentic then becomes a trope.
I want to talk about the other A word, appropriation. When I started this journey, I'm clearly a white guy from New Hampshire. Uh, you couldn't get more out of context, and really couldn't get more different than me being in the middle of Mumbai. A lot of times in the West, we view kind of appropriation as taking without getting permission. When it comes to food, can you appropriate food? And if so, how?
Okay, so all food is appropriation. Every single thing that we eat, we have appropriated from somewhere and someone at some point in time. And ingredients, for example, have been traveling so far across the planet that calling it appropriation is a joke. When you eat a quinoa salad in Delhi, are you appropriating the food of the Andes? No, it's an ingredient. If you make a beef Wellington in Tasmania, can you say no just because the colonials came here, it's our beef Wellington? No, it's not really an appropriation, is it? They did get there. But what if you made a beef Wellington in Japan? It is still a beef Wellington. It is not a Katsu Wellington or something, or Kyoto Wellington or a beef Kyoto, right? So as long as you're true to the basic dish, your take on it, your riff on it is more of a homage to the dish than anything else. Yes, if you decide to take something that is made in a certain part of the globe and you do a terrible job of it, it's just terribly bad cooking. It's not appropriation. So I think that appropriation is a misused term. It's a term of bullying. When you want to bully people who are doing something very, very good with the kind of food you used to eat, you get on that mighty high horse of appropriation because you haven't been able to sell your food well enough and somebody else has. It's as simple as that. One of the restaurants in India is called Indian Accent. It's regularly on the top 50 restaurants in Asia, blah, 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 blah. They do this really amazing dish called a blue cheese naan. So it's a naan stuffed with blue cheese. Now, naan is the bread that came to us from Persia, and blue cheese is something that was made in Europe. But this dish doesn't exist either in Persia or in Europe, and was something that was put together by the chefs designing the menu and trying to show a fusion of ingredients and techniques and abilities and tastes. They can't get it off the menu. They cannot take it off the menu. It is that popular. So, did they appropriate it? I was talking to Gauri Devi the other of the table, and she said that they have this dish, which is basically zoodles, zucchini noodles. I don't even think they're noodles, and they just made it to fill a gap because they didn't have enough vegetarian dishes on their menu. And today they can't get rid of it. It's such an incredibly popular dish. It's a ridiculously simple dish, but it speaks for itself. So did they appropriate the zoodle? Can anybody claim to have been the first person to zoodle? I don't know. Maybe there is somebody who can be tagged down and say, this man zoodled first. If I was the guy, I really wouldn't want to be known for the rest of my life as the man who zoodled.
Fair.
That's a terrible epitaph.
One of my last questions is this. I've been on this journey to really try to discover what is Indian cuisine, and I think that this is a journey that'll definitely span my life. But what advice would you have for me on this journey?
Two things. First, come to India and spend 15 days every year. A different part of India. Do not repeat. There is so much food that no one can in India can say that they've eaten all of Indian food. There's such a huge variety of ingredients, techniques, flavors, tastes, spices, so on and so forth. So that's something that I tell anybody who wanted to cook Indian food. And the second thing is ultimately you've got to be true to yourself. What do you believe in? What is your truth? So apart from coming to India, what you need to do is in the final call, you need to be true to yourself. As long as you believe in what you do, and as long as you're sure what you're doing is good and it's right, that's all that matters. No amount of you are appropriating my food or my mother doesn't make it this way means anything. Ultimately, your clients will judge you. And if even 75% of your clients think that you opened up a new world to them, you will have won so far ahead of the crowd, it's not funny.
Thank you. It's an, like I said, it's an honor to even be here and have this conversation. And I think you're right. Every year, 15 days, and then maybe in 3 or 4 lifetimes we can start scratching the surface of what it means to cook and to understand Indian food.
Who knows, after the first couple of years, or they'll say, okay, Keith, you and Kurush need to start doing this on a full-time basis for the next 5 years, and we'll give you money and a production crew and a little AC bus, and you can see India and eat India.
Yeah, I mean, sign me up. Number one, and number two, I mean, if we can get that guy Ishan that we know on board, maybe next thing you know, we're there.
As soon as he finishes writing, we'll talk to him.
Cello.